Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Hercule Poirot and the Man Who Died Twice, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Corpse That Vanished. The rain came down in sheets, slamming against the windows of Blackridge Manor like fists trying to break through the glass. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and menacing, while lightning split the sky wide open, revealing for a moment the stark silhouette of the old estate, a decaying monument to secrets better left buried. Inside, the silence was unnatural, and then a scream. It was sharp, female, and cut through the house like a blade. Heavy footsteps echoed down the marble corridor as a maid rushed toward the east wing. But by the time she reached the door, it was locked from the inside. She pounded, crying out for an answer. None came. Then, a single gunshot, followed by nothing, no movement, no sound, just the relentless pounding of rain and the thudding of her heart. By the time they broke the door down, the room was empty. No body, no blood. Just the lingering scent of gunpowder and the unmistakable echo of death. But how do you investigate a murder without a corpse? 3 hours later, Hercule Poirot stood in the very same room. The storm had passed, but the air still felt thick, charged with something invisible but tangible. His eyes swept across the room slowly, every surface telling a different story. There was a single overturned chair, a shattered glass near the fireplace, a faint impression on the edge of the bed, as if someone had just sat there. But no corpse, no blood, nothing that confirmed what everyone had heard. The scream, the gunshot, the locked door. "I do not solve ghosts," Poirot muttered, more to himself than anyone else, "but something here is most irregular." The victim, Leonard Halcroft, was a retired war correspondent known for uncovering secrets others wanted to stay buried. Recently returned from the Middle East, he'd locked himself in Blackridge Manor for weeks. No visitors, no calls, only whispers of a manuscript no one had seen and an enemy no one could name. And now he was gone, presumed dead. But Poirot knew better than to presume anything. As he interviewed the household, a web began to form. Every member of the manor, each servant, each guest, had a reason to want Leonard gone. But none of their stories quite fit. There was Clara Halcroft, the widow, young, poised, too calm. She claimed to be in her room when the scream happened, but her eyes were swollen, like she'd cried too hard too, recently. Poirot noticed a torn sleeve on her gown, a bruise barely concealed beneath lace. She spoke of love and grief, but her fingers trembled only when asked about the manuscript. Then there was Edward Vale, Leonard's old friend and estate manager. Loyal, devoted, or so it seemed. But Poirot spotted something odd, a smear of mud on Edward's boots, and a single word scribbled in his notebook, quickly scratched out, "Inheritance." When questioned, Edward fumbled, said he had no idea what Leonard was working on. Yet, a hidden compartment in his study revealed torn pages from a document titled "The Betrayal Files." Unfinished, dangerous. The maid, Elsa, young and nervous, admitted to hearing voices the night before the scream. Mr. Halcroft was arguing with someone, but he was alone, she whispered. Or supposed to be. Poirot pressed her gently, and she finally revealed the strange detail. 2 wine glasses in Leonard's room that morning, one stained with lipstick. Who else was here? Poirot examined the room again. The key had been inside when they forced the door open. The windows were latched from within. No sign of forced entry. And yet Leonard had disappeared into thin air. That night, Poirot walked the halls of Blackridge Manor alone. The ticking of an old grandfather clock seemed louder in the dark, counting down to something unseen. In the east wing, he paused. There was something off. He bent to the floor where the carpet met the wall. Gently, he peeled it back, a trapdoor. Dusty, rusted, but functional. It led to a narrow passageway, barely large enough for a man to crawl through. Poirot followed it with a lantern, feeling the walls tighten around him. After 10 agonizing minutes, he emerged in the stables behind the manor. Fresh tracks. Poirot knelt. The imprint of expensive leather shoes. Someone had left. Alive. But if Leonard had faked his death, why? The answer came the next morning. A letter postmarked the day before the murder arrived at Poirot's hotel. It was from Leonard himself. If I die, it won't be by accident. Trust no one in this house, especially not Clara. Suddenly, everything tilted. Poirot returned to the manor and confronted Clara. Her facade cracked immediately. He was going to expose me, she said, voice shaking. Everything, my lies, my past, I couldn't let him. What past? Poirot asked softly. I was never his wife, she whispered. Not legally. I married under a false name. I was already married to someone else. Someone dangerous. Leonard found out. He said he'd reveal everything in his book. Poirot narrowed his eyes. And you killed him? Clara laughed. I tried. Poison. But it was too slow. He found out before it took effect. That's why he locked the door. That's why he staged it. He wanted to disappear before I could try again. Red herring. Clara wasn't the killer. She wanted to be, but Leonard had beat her to the punch, vanishing before she could act, which meant someone else had gotten to him first. Poirot reviewed every detail again. The trapdoor, the letter, the lipstick on the glass, and then it hit him. There was someone else, a name that hadn't appeared in any interviews, a person mentioned in passing in Leonard's private notes. Isabelle Vernet, former MI6, disgraced, disappeared after a failed operation in Syria, an operation Leonard had covered in one of his reports. She had reason to kill, reason to hide, and she knew how to disappear bodies. Poirot dug deeper. Phone call to a government contact confirmed it. Isabel was spotted near the manor 2 days before the murder. And Edward? He wasn't just Leonard's friend. He was Isabel's handler. The final twist unraveled in a fury. Leonard hadn't died. Not at first. But he had planned to disappear, go into hiding to finish his manuscript, expose Isabel and Edward. But Edward had panicked. He couldn't let the truth come out. Not about the operation, not about Isabel's identity. And so, once Leonard vanished into the passageway, Edward was waiting, in the stables. He finished what Clara couldn't, strangled Leonard, and buried his body beneath the floorboards. Poirot led the police to the stable that afternoon. They found the body exactly where Poirot said it would be, cold, stiff, mouth open in what looked like shock. The truth had caught up. As Edward was dragged away, Clara stood alone in the garden, watching the sun set behind the manor. Her hands were shaking. You loved him, Poirot said, quietly. She nodded. I just wanted to scare him, make him leave. I never thought. Poirot tipped his hat, eyes dark. When we lie to protect ourselves, we become the very danger we feared. The camera pulls back. Blackridge Manor looms once again in silhouette, rain returning in soft, steady droplets. A body was found, a truth uncovered, but the echoes of the scream. They still live in the walls, and somewhere, far away, a copy of the betrayal files waits to be published, with names that were never meant to be known. Chapter 2. The Second Death. The body was found at precisely 6:17 in the morning, curled unnaturally at the foot of the marble staircase inside Ashcroft Hall. His name was Julian Markham, banker, philanthropist, and recently the centerpiece of a scandal involving missing war bonds and the collapse of an offshore account that had once funded charities across Europe. His death was supposed to close a chapter. Instead, it opened another, darker one, because Julian Markham had already been declared dead. 6 months ago, his yacht had exploded off the coast of Corsica. His remains had been identified, what little had been found, and a public funeral had followed. The nation mourned. His estate was split. His wife remarried. Case closed. But now, here he was again. The body was unmistakably his. Same angular jaw, the thin scar under his left eye, even the gold wedding band still on his finger, engraved with his wife's initials. And yet, the forensics were clear. This wasn't a twin or a look-alike. It was Julian. No doubt, no mistake. He had died twice, once in a fireball at sea, and now again, violently, with a broken neck and bruises along his spine. Hercule Poirot arrived just past dawn, his silhouette framed against the blood-orange light filtering through the stained glass of the hall's foyer. The grandeur of the estate could not hide the rot in its heart. Something about the scene felt staged, too clean, too obvious. A man who dies twice, mon ami, Poirot murmured to himself, is either most unfortunate or most deceitful. The investigation began with the residents of Ashcroft Hall. Every one of them held a thread to the mystery, whether they knew it or not. At the center was Vivian Markham, Julian's widow, now Lady Ashcroft by marriage to Lord Elliot Ashcroft, an aristocrat whose wealth came from old tobacco, oil, and rumor. Vivienne was statuesque, reserved, beautiful in that fragile porcelain doll way that made people underestimate her. But Poirot saw, through the performance, there was fear behind her poise, and guilt. Not the guilt of a killer, but of a woman who had loved the wrong man too many times. She swore she had no idea Julian was alive, said he had become paranoid in the months before his yacht accident, that he'd begun to see enemies in every mirror. And yet, she had remarried barely 4 months after the funeral. Fast, too fast. Grief, she claimed softly, is not measured by time, Monsieur Poirot, only by silence. Lord Ashcroft, her new husband, was harder to read. He seemed unshaken by Julian's reappearance and death, cold, composed, calculating. His voice was steady, even as he said, if Julian faked his death and came back, he must have been mad. This isn't the act of a sane man. But Poirot noted the subtle tension in his jaw, the way he avoided meeting Vivian's gaze. There was history between the two men, and it had not ended with the supposed death at sea. Then came Dr. Edmund Ray, the family physician, and longtime confidant of the Markhams, a man who had signed Julian's original death certificate based on DNA pulled from charred remains. But something didn't sit right. He was too defensive, too rehearsed. When Poirot questioned him about the autopsy procedures and the unusual speed with which the body had been buried, Dr. Ray stammered, "There were extenuating circumstances, pressure from the family. I trusted the lab results." "Ah," Poirot said quietly, "you trusted. But did you verify, monsieur?" And then, as if the case wasn't already tangled in lies, another twist emerged. The security footage from the hall's cameras, installed only a month ago, showed Julian entering the estate at 3:12 a.m. He was alone, soaked from the rain, limping, clutching something tightly to his chest, a small, leather-bound notebook. But by the time the body was found, it was gone. Poirot's mind raced. What was in that book? Why risk returning? Why now? The next clue came not from a suspect, but from a whisper. A young housemaid named Lena, no older than 17, quietly told Poirot she'd seen someone else in the hallway around the same time. "It was Mrs. Ashcroft," she said. "She was barefoot. Her robe was stained. I think she'd been crying." Poirot questioned her privately, and she admitted something else. She'd overheard a conversation 2 nights prior. Vivienne had been on the phone, crying, begging. "You said you'd stay dead," she had whispered. "You promised, Julian. You promised." False lead. Vivienne hadn't killed him. She had feared him. The first real break came when Poirot had the original remains from the yacht exhumed. They had been buried in a family plot, far from the public eye. When the coffin was opened, the truth was revealed. The remains weren't Julian's at all. The DNA had been faked. The jawbone had belonged to someone else. A homeless man, possibly lured aboard to act as a decoy. Julian had staged his death. But why? A safe in Julian's private study, hidden behind a sliding bookshelf, held the answer. Poirot cracked the code. Julian's mother's birthday, curiously left out of all public records, and inside he found the missing notebook. It was filled with names, accounts, meeting times, blackmail notes. Julian had been documenting a secret fund that funneled money into high-level political bribery. Millions laundered through international accounts. Names inside included judges, diplomats, and most shockingly, Lord Ashcroft. The moment Poirot read the name, the final pieces clicked. Julian had discovered the corruption. He planned to leak it, but someone found out. And when the storm came and the yacht exploded, it wasn't Julian who died, but someone else in his place. Julian had stayed hidden all this time. But the guilt, combined with the knowledge that Vivienne had remarried the very man Julian had sought to expose, had brought him back. He returned to confront Lord Ashcroft, likely to plead with Vivienne, perhaps to make peace, before exposing the truth. Instead, he died. Poirot brought the evidence forward that afternoon. Lord Ashcroft was arrested quietly, without incident. The cause of death, per Dr. Ray's revised autopsy, had been a single, precise blow to the base of the skull, a method used in military assassinations to ensure silence and speed. Ashcroft had once served in the colonial forces. Old habits, old tools. Vivienne collapsed when she heard. "I thought he changed," she said, through tears. "I thought Julian was the monster." Poirot stood in silence for a moment before replying. "Sometimes, madame, we only see the truth once it's far too late." As he exited the estate, the clouds opened again. Rain fell, gentle and steady, washing the blood from the marble steps. Poirot paused, looking back once more at Ashcroft Hall, its lights dimmed, its walls heavy with secrets finally unburied. Julian Markham had died twice. The first time, to escape the sins of others. The second, to pay for his own. There would be no third. Chapter 3. A Letter from the Grave. The letter arrived just after midnight. No stamp, no postmark, no courier. Just a pale blue envelope, perfectly centered on the mahogany writing desk of Colonel Bartholomew Hyde. He found it when he returned from his evening walk, dripping with rain, a glass of scotch already in hand, the silence of Greymont Estate pressing against him like a second skin. The paper was dry, the ink fresh, but it was the signature at the bottom that made him stop breathing. Sincerely, Margaret. Margaret Hyde had died 11 months ago. He dropped the glass. It shattered, the sound too loud in the stillness of the manor. He stared at the letter again, hands trembling, lips murmuring her name as if summoning a ghost. Margaret, his wife, the love of his life, buried beneath the yew tree behind the chapel, beneath granite and gilt. The doctors had called it a stroke, quick, painless. But nothing about Margaret's death had ever sat quite right. Not with him, and certainly not with Poirot, who had attended the funeral with suspicion, quietly folded into the creases of his overcoat. Now, the letter changed everything. Poirot arrived the next morning. His expression was unreadable as he stood in the sun-drenched library, the letter spread before him like evidence in a courtroom. The handwriting was flawless, slanted, elegant, undeniably Margaret's. Poirot had seen it on invitations, menus, love notes, and once, on a goodbye letter, never meant to be found. But here it was again, unmistakable, a ghost in ink. "My friend," he said, voice quiet, "do you recognize the paper?" Bartholomew nodded slowly. She kept a stash of that exact stationery in her desk. It was custom, watermarked. Only 20 sheets were ever printed. "And how many remain?" Poirot's eyes were already scanning the walls, the furniture, the shadows that clung to them. Bartholomew swallowed. "None, or so I thought. After she died, I burned the rest. Then either someone has found a perfect replica." Poirot paused, running a gloved finger across the edge of the envelope, "or someone never meant for her death to feel final." The investigation began with the estate. Greymount was vast. Cold stone, winding corridors, locked doors, and forgotten passageways. It had history, too much of it. Servants spoke in hushed tones, afraid to say Margaret's name aloud. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dallow, admitted something strange. 2 nights ago, she'd found the greenhouse door ajar. Margaret had loved the greenhouse, had spent hours pruning roses even in winter, but since her death, it had been locked, or so they thought. Poirot visited the space himself. Dust hung in the air like forgotten breath. Cobwebs laced the corners, but one section, precisely one, had been recently cleared. A single pair of muddy footprints led from the back door to the orchid bench. There, beneath a tray of soil, Poirot found it. A second letter, addressed not to Bartholomew, but to Sophie. Trenholme. Sophie had been Margaret's closest friend, a painter, eccentric, too beautiful for her own good, people whispered. Poirot paid her a visit at her studio in the village. Canvases lined the walls, abstract swirls of pain and colour. But one caught his eye. A portrait. Margaret, painted posthumously, or so it was claimed. "Did she ever confide in you?" Poirot asked softly. Sophie hesitated. Her eyes were wet. "She was scared," she finally said. "She told me someone was watching her, that she was being followed. I thought it was the grief talking or her migraines. I never believed she was in danger." Poirot leaned forward. What about the letters? Sophie's face went pale. You got one too? Another letter emerged days later. This time, slipped into Poirot's own coat pocket while he was walking the halls of the manor. There were no witnesses. No camera caught it. No one saw a hand or shadow. And yet, it was there, written in the same unmistakable script. I knew you would come, it read. I knew you would find what they tried to bury. The truth is deeper than death, Hercule. You must dig. Suddenly, the case shifted. This was no hoax, no deranged impersonation. Whoever was writing these letters knew Poirot, knew the secrets no one else could, knew, for instance, about the fireplace in the East Corridor, bricked up decades ago, where Margaret once claimed to have hidden something too dangerous to keep above ground. Poirot had always believed it a metaphor. Now, it was a map. They broke open the fireplace that evening. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, they found a stack of pages, Margaret's private journal. Only the final pages mattered. They spoke of fear, of betrayal, and a name, Dr. Felix Harwood. Felix was the family physician, respected, discreet, trusted by every member of the Hyde family for over 20 years. But Poirot noticed something in the journal. Margaret had written that her medication had changed color, that it had begun to taste different, that she was more tired, more forgetful. Her last line read, "He says it's my age, but I'm only 52. I know he's lying. I think he's trying to kill me." Dr. Harwood denied everything, calmly, coldly. Margaret was unstable. She had early-onset dementia. She became paranoid, invented enemies where there were none. "But you wrote the prescriptions," Poirot pressed. "You administered the injections. You controlled every dose." Harwood folded his arms. "Are you accusing me, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Not yet." That night, a fourth letter appeared. This one wasn't delivered. It was found inside the family crypt, tucked beneath the marble slab that bore Margaret's name. The groundskeeper discovered it while replacing wilted flowers. It was damp, but the ink survived. "They're watching you now. Be careful. I was wrong about who it was. It wasn't Felix alone. He's covering for someone else. Someone I loved. Someone I trusted." Poirot's mind raced. If not Harwood, then who? Who did Margaret love? Who had access to the estate? Who had a motive? The answer came from Eleanor, Margaret's sister-in-law, a quiet woman, overshadowed, unremarkable, until now. She came to Poirot in tears, shaking, and placed a final letter in his hand. "She gave it to me the day before she died," Eleanor whispered. "Said I'd know when to open it. I've waited. I thought it was over." The letter was short, but devastating. "Eleanor, I know about you and Bartholomew. I know it's been going on for years. I don't blame you, but I can't protect you anymore. He's going to kill me. And then he's going to marry you. Don't let him." The truth, when it came, was monstrous in its elegance. Bartholomew had poisoned Margaret, slowly, over months, the perfect crime, with Harwood's help. But what he hadn't expected was Margaret's resolve. She knew. And before she died, she planted the letters, the journal, the clues, every piece of the puzzle. She knew Poirot would come, knew he would listen. She had written from the grave, and in doing so, brought about justice the living could not. When Bartholomew was arrested, he didn't speak, didn't blink, as if he had already mourned the moment. Eleanor disappeared that same night, a single note left behind. I loved her too. Poirot stood alone in the greenhouse, rain pattering on the glass, watching a white rose bloom where none had before. A letter, a voice, a woman silenced in life, who refused to be forgotten. Justice finally had bloomed. Chapter 4. The Widow's Secret. It was raining at the funeral. Of course it was. The sky hung heavy over the stone chapel like a shroud, thick with ash-colored clouds, as if mourning alongside the black-clad guests gathered to say goodbye to Charles Everleigh, billionaire industrialist, war veteran, husband of the inscrutable and hauntingly elegant Eleanor Everleigh. The casket gleamed like lacquered onyx beneath the weight of roses, and Eleanor stood beside it, one gloved hand on the polished surface, the other clutching a white handkerchief streaked with mascara and grief. She didn't sob. Her tears were silent, precise, each one falling like a calculated note in a symphony no one else could hear. Her composure, while admirable, sent whispers through the crowd. So dignified, someone murmured. So devoted. But Hercule Poirot watched her with narrowed eyes, not because of her grief, but because he could tell something was off. She was crying, yes, but it wasn't for her husband. 2 days after the funeral, the first oddity surfaced. A will was discovered, newly signed, unregistered, and radically different from the version filed 6 months prior. The old will had left the Everleigh estate to Charles's only son from a previous marriage, Vincent. But the new one, it gave everything to Eleanor. Everything. The house, the business shares, even the heirloom ring meant to pass from father to son. Poirot was summoned quietly, discreetly, under the pretense of verifying the signature, but it wasn't just the will that raised questions. It was what came with it. A letter, unsigned, found in Charles's study drawer. "She is not who she says she is," it read. "And if I disappear, know this, she already knows I found out." The tone was chilling, desperate. Poirot read the letter again, and again. The handwriting was unmistakably Charles's, albeit shakier than usual. But the contents suggested a man afraid not of illness or death, but betrayal. Poirot pressed gently, beginning with Eleanor herself. She received him in the drawing room of Greystone Manor, dressed in mourning black, her voice soft, her every word deliberate. She described Charles as a man who had grown paranoid in his final months. She said he saw threats where there were none, suspected her of affairs she never had, and became obsessed with the past. A past that, according to her, didn't matter anymore. He was a brilliant man, she said, eyes distant. But brilliance often casts long shadows. Poirot noted the wedding portrait still hanging on the wall. Charles's expression in it was solemn. Hers was unreadable. Vincent Everleigh, on the other hand, didn't hold back. "She poisoned him," he spat. "I don't care what the doctors say. He was healthy 6 months ago." Then she moved back in, suddenly, without explanation, and he withered like a dying tree. Vincent, though brash, was passionate, too passionate to be entirely trusted. His alibi for the night Charles collapsed was weak. He claimed to be at his townhouse downtown, asleep, alone. Poirot investigated the death certificate again. Cause, heart failure. But a second glance at the medical reports raised an eyebrow. Elevated traces of digitalis, a plant-based toxin, deadly in high doses, easily mistaken for heart medication. But no one had flagged it. No one had questioned it. Not until now. Then came the maid's confession. Alice, young and nervous, finally broke beneath Poirot's steady gaze. She had found a locked box beneath Eleanor's bed. Took a peek. Inside were love letters. Dozens. But they weren't from Charles. They were addressed to someone named Lucas Merrick. Poirot tracked him to a secluded cottage outside Devon. He lived alone, under an assumed name, and claimed to be a ghostwriter. But Poirot saw the truth in his eyes: fear, guilt, love, the three most dangerous emotions when twisted together. Under pressure, Lucas admitted he had been involved with Eleanor for over 2 years. He had met her long before Charles's health began to fail. They had plans. "But I didn't know he'd die," Lucas said, hands shaking. "I never wanted that. I begged her to leave him." Poirot listened in silence, then asked one simple question. "Did you write the will?" Lucas froze. "No," he said after too long a pause. "She said she'd take care of everything. The will, the sudden inheritance, the digitalis. It all pointed toward Eleanor. Too obvious." Poirot returned to Greystone Manor. This time, he went alone. Rain lashed the windows again as he wandered the halls, and then, in the attic, he found it. A trunk, locked, hidden behind old furniture and draped canvas. Inside, beneath moth-eaten blankets, were passports, IDs, documents, all belonging to different women, but bearing Eleanor's face. Over the course of 30 years, she had been 5 different people. Each time, she had married a wealthy man. Each time, he had died within 5 years. Quietly, suddenly, naturally. But the final photo in the trunk stopped Poirot cold. It was Charles, not as a husband, but as a young man. And beside him, a woman with the same face as Eleanor, but the name was different. Not Eleanor, Elizabeth Halifax. She wasn't his wife. She was his half-sister. The ultimate twist unraveled with surgical precision. Eleanor, or Elizabeth, had returned to Charles's life, under a new name. He hadn't recognized her at first, but when he did, it was too late. She had embedded herself into the home, into the finances, into his world. He had fallen ill not long after. When he began to suspect, he drafted the letter found in his desk. He never made it to the authorities. The will she forged was the final nail. But it wasn't just about money. It was revenge. Decades ago, Charles's father had disowned Elizabeth's mother, left her destitute, erased her from the family records. Elizabeth had grown up watching her mother waste away in poverty while Charles enjoyed luxury and privilege. She had never forgotten, and when she found a way back into his life, she took it, not to heal, to punish. The final confrontation was devastating. Poirot stood in the drawing room as Eleanor was placed under arrest. She didn't cry this time. She didn't beg. She only smiled, faintly, as if she'd already made peace with what she had done. "I cried at the funeral," she said softly, "but not for Charles. I cried for the girl I used to be, the one who thought justice was ever free." Poirot watched her go, rain trailing down the windows like the tears she no longer shed. Justice had come at last, but it tasted of ashes. Chapter 5. Footprints in Blood. The scream came at 3:41 a.m. Sharp, raw, human. A sound so jagged it sliced through the thick fog that blanketed the Black Hollow countryside like a burial shroud. By the time the household reached the library, the door was locked from the inside. No windows open, no way in, no way out. They had to break it down, and what they found inside would stain the rest of their lives. Dr. Nathaniel Rowe, reclusive historian, respected academic, and heir to the Hollow's last great estate, was dead, slumped in his reading chair, throat slit with surgical precision. A trail of footprints, soaked in blood, led from the entryway to his body. They were bare, wide-set, unmistakably human. But there was only one set, No return, no other prints, just one path, straight into death. Poirot arrived just before sunrise. The body had already been removed, but the blood remained. A single set of dark, wet footprints across the pale marble floor, stopping precisely at the chair, as if the killer had vanished into the corpse. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered under his breath, kneeling beside the final footprint. This is not a murder. It is a message. Black Hollow Manor had always been a place of secrets. Built in the late 1700s, it had survived fires, wars, bankruptcies, and betrayals. But the walls had always whispered. The Rowe family was brilliant, yes, but brilliance never came without madness. Nathaniel had lived alone for over a decade after the death of his brother Marcus in what was officially ruled an accident, a fall down the west staircase. But there were whispers then too. Now Nathaniel was dead, and the manner of his death made one thing certain: it was meant to confuse, to disturb, to haunt. The suspects were few, but potent. Each one carried shadows, each one with reason, each one with something to hide. First, there was Vivian Wren, Nathaniel's live-in assistant. Pale, intelligent, painfully precise in her speech. She claimed to have been asleep in her quarters when the scream sounded. But Poirot noted the tremble in her hand as she handed him her written statement. Her wrists bore faint scars. She blinked too much when asked about Marcus. I hardly knew him, she said. But Poirot had already found a photograph in Nathaniel's study. Marcus and Vivian, arm in arm, smiling like old lovers. Then came Inspector Thorne, the local lawman who'd known the Rowes since boyhood. Loyal, or at least pretending to be, he seemed too eager to wrap the case. Called it a locked-room suicide. Dismissed the footprints as staged. But Poirot had already identified a discrepancy in Thorne's timeline. He claimed to have arrived 20 minutes after the scream. But the neighbor, a Mrs. Copley, insisted she saw his car at the gates 10 minutes before. Why lie about your arrival unless you needed to rewrite your part in the story? And finally, there was Eliza Rowe, Marcus's widow. She had come back to Black Hollow only weeks before the murder, after a decade of silence. She claimed she wanted closure, said she wanted to confront Nathaniel about Marcus's death. Poirot found her sipping tea in the garden, wearing black velvet gloves despite the heat. When he asked what brought her back, she looked him dead in the eye and said, "Regret is a powerful motivator, Monsieur Poirot. Almost as powerful as revenge." The mystery deepened when the autopsy report revealed something unexpected. Nathaniel had been sedated before death. Powerful barbiturate in his system, enough to paralyze, not kill. Whoever slit his throat did it slowly, deliberately, knowing he couldn't scream again. Poirot wandered the manor late that night. Moonlight sliced through cracked windows, casting jagged shadows across the floors. And there, just outside the library, he saw it, a faint smear of blood along the baseboard. Not a footprint, a drag mark, as if something had been pulled, or someone. He followed it. It led to the fireplace. Inside, hidden beneath soot and ash, was a second trail. This one led to a trapdoor, a passageway, narrow and stone-lined, that wound beneath the house, like a secret artery. Poirot followed it, lantern in hand, heart steady. And when he emerged in the old wine cellar, he found what he had suspected all along. A second pair of footprints. They were smaller, lighter. They entered from the hidden tunnel and stopped in front of an empty wine rack. Behind that rack, Poirot found a hollow wall, and inside, a notebook, Nathaniel's journal. He read every page. It spoke of fear, of guilt, and most disturbingly, of Marcus. Not his death, but what happened before. The abuse, the accusations, the late-night screams, the silence from the family. Nathaniel had tried to protect him, but he had failed. He wrote that Marcus had confronted someone powerful, someone untouchable, and then he fell. The final entry read, "She said she forgave me." But her eyes, they told a different story. The she was Eliza. Poirot returned to confront her. She didn't run, didn't deny it. She simply removed her gloves, revealing fresh burns on her fingertips, acid, used to destroy fingerprints. "I never planned to kill him," she said softly. "I only wanted him to confess, to admit what they did to Marcus, but he refused. He said Marcus was weak, that it was for the best." Tears welled in her eyes. "So I gave him the pills, watched him drift, and then I made him bleed, the way Marcus bled inside for years." The footprints, she explained, were her own. She painted her feet with his blood, walked to his chair, and left the trail. Then she used the servant tunnel to vanish. A single set of prints, one way, no return. It was not madness, it was a message, justice, in her own hand. Poirot stood in silence. The law would come for her, but he would not stop her as she turned herself in. Some truths are too old for mercy, and some crimes never truly end. Chapter 6. The Man with No Face. The fire was out before dawn. It had raged for nearly 3 hours, tearing through the Briarwood Sanitarium like a living thing, devouring walls, ceilings, history. By the time the final flames sputtered out, the old asylum stood gutted, its east wing collapsed, its records room reduced to ash, its secrets charred beyond recovery. And yet, in the smoldering ruins, one thing remained. A body, or what was left of it, mangled, burnt beyond recognition. No face, no fingers, no identifiers. Just the charred frame of a man who, according to hospital logs, had never existed. He wasn't on any patient list, not in the visitor logs, not in the personnel roster. He had no wristband, no uniform, no name, and yet he'd been in a locked room, room 6A, on a floor, reserved for the most dangerous patients. The fire had started from there. Arson, the inspectors would later say, deliberate, calculated, a distraction, a cover-up. Hercule Poirot stood before the ruins just past midday, his eyes narrowed against the acrid smoke rising in slow ghosts from the blackened stones. His trench coat fluttered in the wind, but his thoughts were still, silent and sharp. A man with no face and no history, impossible. No one simply appears in a locked room, and no one dies in fire twice. The director of the facility, Dr. Julian Straith, was already unraveling, pale, shaking, muttering contradictions. He was a John Doe, brought in 3 weeks ago. He didn't speak, wouldn't, eat covered in scars. We assumed he was a vagrant. PTSD maybe, someone from the war. But Poirot knew that tone. The way a man lies when he's too terrified to remember what truth sounds like. Room 6A had been sealed. Straith himself had signed the order. Why? "I was protecting my staff," he insisted. He hurt people." "How?" Poirot asked, voice gentle, almost kind. The answer came like a confession. "He knew things," Straith whispered, "things he couldn't possibly have known." By nightfall, more disturbing details emerged. Nurse Haley Craddock, young, compassionate, new to the ward, revealed she had spoken with the man twice. "He didn't talk like a patient," she said. "He asked me about my mother, my real name. He said things no one else could have known, things I've never said aloud. She broke down crying before she could continue. Poirot let her cry, let her tremble, and then asked gently, "Did he ever mention a name?" She hesitated. "Number, but he called me daughter. I'm not his daughter." But for a second, I believed him. The first clue came not from within the asylum, but from the ashes outside. Beneath the collapsed eaves of the chapel, the fire brigade found a second body, fresh, clean, shot twice in the chest, execution style. The victim, Elias Venn, a former intelligence operative who had vanished from the agency 4 years earlier. His fingerprints were flagged instantly. What was Venn doing in Briarwood, and why was he dead while the faceless man was found in the fire he likely started? Poirot followed the thread to Venn's sister, Madeleine, a bitter recluse who had long believed Elias was still alive. Her first words to Poirot were not of mourning, but of fury. "They found him because he got too close. I told him not to go back there." When pressed, she said, Elias had recently uncovered something buried in a forgotten file, something about a man who'd been wiped from every database, every photograph, a project maybe, a ghost. Code, name, Orpheus. But Orpheus had supposedly died 12 years ago, killed in an accident in the Balkans. No body was recovered, no burial, just silence. Poirot revisited the scorched remains of room 6A. Under soot, behind what remained of the dresser, he found it. A single page, partially protected by a fallen pipe. Black ink, faded but legible. A list of names, 8 names. 6 were crossed out. 2 remained. One was Elias Venn. The other, Hercule Poirot. For the first time in years, Poirot felt the coldness of fear settle under his skin. Who was this man, and how did he know him? He moved quickly. Through conversations with former asylum staff, he uncovered whispers of a man who knew too much, who spoke of crimes never reported, secrets never spoken aloud. One orderly said the man had predicted a patient's suicide before it happened. Another claimed he described a murder from 30 years prior, right down to the brand of poison used. Poirot began to wonder if this was madness or memory. The breakthrough came through facial reconstruction, built off bone structure and residual cartilage. The forensic artist rendered an image, no name to attach to it, but a face nonetheless. Poirot's breath caught when he saw it, because he did recognize that face. But not from recent memory. It was the face of a man he had seen once before, briefly, years ago, at the trial of Alphonse Belfort, a political assassin whose crimes had nearly destabilized half of Europe. That man had stood in the gallery, silent, still, watching Poirot testify. Then, gone, vanished. No one knew who he was, until now. His name, Poirot later discovered through a coded archive in Venn's belongings, was Dorian Kessler, former counterintelligence. Allegiance unknown. Officially declared dead in 1932. But in the margins of Venn's handwritten notes, one sentence stood out. Kessler didn't die. He disappeared. The agency wanted him erased. He knew too much. He saw the monsters in the mirror and became one. The fire had not been meant to kill him. It had been meant to kill his story. But Kessler had planned for that too. In the final twist of the investigation, a thumb drive, discovered in a hollowed-out brick in the sanitarium's east garden wall, contained dozens of classified files, poisonings, disappearances, manipulations, psychological experiments conducted on dissidents and agents alike. A web of silence spanning decades. And at the center of it, Briarwood, Kessler had been imprisoned, not treated. They had buried him behind white walls and padded doors, and when he finally broke free, he left fire in his wake, not to destroy truth, but to expose it. But the question remained, was Kessler dead? The body was too damaged to confirm, and the last camera footage, captured 3 minutes before the fire alarm, showed something chilling. Kessler, in the hallway, walking calmly, turning the corner, but never turning back. 1 minute later, a second figure appears, dressed the same, moving the same, but the face, obscured by flame and smoke. Poirot watches the footage again and again, until finally he leans forward and whispers, "Which one was the ghost?" No one ever found a trace of Kessler after that night. No fingerprints, no sightings, nothing but the lingering scent of smoke, and the haunting sense that somewhere the man with no face still walks among them, watching, waiting, and perhaps remembering. Chapter 7. Poirot's Fatal Mistake. The train shrieked into the station just after midnight, slicing through the silence of Calais like a silver bullet. Fog curled around its wheels, masking the platform in a ghostly shroud. Somewhere beyond the steam and cold metal, a shot rang out. One. Just one. The scream that followed was sharper. Female. Poirot, standing near the rear carriage, turned sharply, his instincts already ahead of his body. By the time he reached the source, there was already blood. A man lay crumpled beside the baggage car, his coat half open, his eyes wide, but empty. He had been shot through the heart. There was no identification, no luggage, no ticket. Just a piece of paper in his pocket with one word scrawled in shaky ink. Lazare. Poirot froze. That name hadn't surfaced in over a decade. It had been buried in a file labeled Classified, Department Black. It was a case closed long ago, too clean, too fast, and suddenly it was back, with a corpse to prove it. The authorities moved quickly, sealing off the station, interviewing every passenger, combing the scene. But the clues didn't add up. No witnesses saw the shot. No weapon was recovered. And strangest of all, no one remembered the man boarding the train. It was impossible. And yet, it had happened. Poirot returned to his hotel with the weight of something darker than murder on his shoulders. In the silence of his room, he turned the word Lazare over in his mind again and again, like a prayer or a curse. Years ago, Lazare had been the code name of a spy, a manipulator, a master of disguise and psychological warfare. He had been blamed for at least 6 assassinations across Europe, but no photo of him had ever been captured, no fingerprints, no confirmed identity. Some said he was already dead, others believed he never existed. But Poirot had believed differently, and he had made a choice. He had named a man, accused him, a man called Armand Duret. Duret had died in prison 6 months later, and Poirot had moved on. Until now. Poirot met with Inspector Jourdain the following morning. Jourdain, a blunt, practical man with little patience for ghosts, dismissed the connection. "It's a coincidence," he insisted. "You buried Lazare years ago, Poirot. Don't dig up the dead." Poirot didn't answer, because deep down he wasn't sure Lazare had ever been buried. The investigation unfolded slowly, too slowly. Witnesses contradicted each other. Timelines bent. One woman claimed she saw the victim arguing with someone in the smoking car. Another swore he never left his seat. Poirot felt something slipping through his fingers, something just out of reach. Then came the second death. A woman, shot in her apartment in Paris, clean kill, same bullet caliber, Same message. A note left on her desk this time. One mistake, one price. Her name was Simone Duret, Armand Duret's daughter. Poirot sat in silence as the coroner zipped her body shut. The guilt came in waves now, crashing, drowning. He had made the call all those years ago. He had chosen the evidence, trusted the confession. But now he wasn't certain. Was it a planted trail? A performance by a man who lived to deceive? Was Lazare still alive? And was he punishing Poirot? Poirot returned to the original case files, buried deep in archives no one had touched in years. He reviewed every photograph, every report, every statement. And then, on page 47, he found it. A line in an interview transcript. One he had dismissed at the time. A child aged 9 had said, "The man had no shadow." Poirot had thought it a metaphor, something poetic. But what if it wasn't? He began to revisit everyone involved in the original trial. The prosecutor, the 2 key witnesses, the prison guard. One by one, each of them had died in the past 4 years. Accidents, heart attacks, natural causes, or so it had seemed. But now they formed a pattern, and Poirot was next. He doubled his precautions, but it didn't matter. The letter arrived anyway. No stamp, no return address. Just his name, written with surgical precision. Inside was a photograph, a blurry image of a man in the crowd, watching Simone's funeral. Hat low, face turned, but something about the posture, the way he stood, it twisted something in Poirot's gut. The back of the photo had a message. I never left. You simply stopped looking. Poirot knew what he had to do. He returned to the prison where Armand Duret had died. The warden remembered him, begrudgingly. Duret, he admitted, had always claimed innocence, had stopped speaking the last month of his life. Sat in silence. Drew constantly in his cell. Poirot asked to see the drawings. The warden laughed. You're 12 years too late, Poirot. We threw them out. But one remained. In the corner of an old file box, folded behind an inventory list, a single sketch survived. A face, half obscured, half burning. But the eyes, they were the same as the man in the funeral photo. Poirot had not caught Lazare. He had buried the wrong man, and now innocents were dying because of it. But the endgame had already begun. Poirot received an invitation, anonymous but unmistakably deliberate. A time, a place, the Musée des Archives. Midnight, alone, he went. The museum was silent. Dust and marble, shadows clinging to the walls like memories. Poirot moved cautiously, every step echoing too loudly. And then from the center atrium, a voice. Software, amused. Hello, Monsieur Poirot. He turned, and there he was, older. But those same eyes, calm, calculating. I must thank you, Lazare said. You gave me 12 years of freedom. I lived because you were sure. Genius is so fragile when dressed in pride. Poirot said nothing. His heart was pounding, but his mind was already working. Every second counted now. I needed this moment, Lazare continued, not for revenge, for proof that even the great Hercule Poirot bleeds. Poirot narrowed his eyes. You will not leave this room. Lazare smiled. Perhaps, but then again, perhaps I already have. The lights went out. Gunfire erupted. When the police arrived, there were 2 bodies. One, an officer shot in the chaos. The other, a corpse wearing Lazare's signature overcoat, burned beyond recognition. But Poirot knew. It wasn't him. Lazare had escaped. Again. Because the fatal mistake Poirot made wasn't accusing the wrong man. It was thinking the right one had ever truly lost. And now, The genius bore the weight of lives, ruined by a single, flaw certainty. Chapter 8. The Clock That Lied. The grandfather clock struck 12, once, hollow, echoing through the marble halls of Whitmore Estate like a distant warning bell. In the library, a body lay motionless beneath the chandelier, its light flickering above a pool of blood as if hesitating to reveal the truth. The fire had died in the hearth. A shattered teacup lay near the man's hand. His eyes stared upward. Glassy, vacant, final. The victim was Miles Whitmore, billionaire, art collector, tyrant in a silk waistcoat. And as the authorities rushed in, alerted by a late-night call made anonymously from inside the estate, they found a curious detail. The antique clock on the mantel, one of Miles's most prized possessions, had stopped at exactly 11:07 p.m. A detail so precise, so perfectly timed, that it seemed to declare the hour of death with absolute certainty. But as Hercule Poirot stepped into the room, his eyes swept not to the body, nor to the blood, but directly to that clock. He frowned. A small thing, barely a breath, but it was there. Something felt staged. The estate was packed that night. The Whitmore family reunion, an annual charade of champagne, backhanded compliments, and resentments wrapped in tailored suits, had drawn in every blood relative Miles had left. His brother, Felix Whitmore, recently returned from South Africa under the cloud of scandal. His estranged daughter, Beatrice, who had not spoken to her father in 5 years and arrived wearing a veil. His new young wife, Imogen, barely 24, who stood in the foyer trembling behind mascara-laced tears, and his lawyer, Clifton Gray, a man who knew every secret Miles ever paid to keep buried. Every one of them had motive, and every one of them claimed an alibi. Poirot began with the body. No bruising, no forced entry. A neat, clean slit to the throat from behind. No sign of a struggle, a surgical cut. And yet no weapon was found in the room. Whoever had done this had taken it with them. The window was closed, the door locked from the inside. A classic locked room riddle. Clifton Gray was the first to speak. We all heard the clock strike 11. I was in the drawing room with Imogen and Felix. Beatrice was on a call in the garden, I believe. We didn't hear anything unusual. Imogen nodded, but Poirot noticed something strange. Her hands, pristine. Too pristine. No smudges of ash or soot, despite her claiming to have sat near the fire. Her dress had no smell of smoke. Curious. Poirot turned to Beatrice next. She was cold, guarded, her words clipped, rehearsed. I hadn't seen him in years. I only came because he insisted. He wanted to make peace. Did he succeed? Poirot asked softly. She looked away. He never could. Felix, older than the rest, was disheveled, irritable. The man made enemies out of everyone. Are you really surprised someone finally did it? His bitterness was genuine. But bitterness is not guilt. The time of death was confirmed by the coroner the next morning, between 10:50 and 11:15 p.m. And just like that, alibis solidified. The three in the drawing room, visible to each other. Beatrice on a call with her therapist, time-stamped. Imogen reading in the sitting room, with witnesses passing her every few minutes. It was airtight, too airtight. Poirot lingered on the clock. He asked to see the mechanism. Whitmore had collected vintage timepieces for decades. This one, an 18th-century French masterpiece, had been rewound every morning by the butler. But the spring inside was wound fully, untouched. The hands hadn't stopped at 11:07. They had been moved. Someone had tampered with the clock to fix the time of death. which meant it didn't occur at 11:07. It could have happened earlier. Poirot ordered the phone records. Beatrice's call began at 11:10 p.m., but something was odd. The therapist reported that Beatrice had been distracted, nervous even, asking if they could start late due to a minor incident. Poirot asked a simple question. Why delay a call by 5 minutes if you're just walking through the garden, unless you were in the house at 11 and had to get out? Beatrice denied it, until Poirot found the footprints, barely visible in the garden bed outside the library, a size that matched her boots. She had doubled back through the terrace door. There were smudges on the handle. Prints. Heron. But she didn't kill him. That was the second twist. Beatrice confessed to sneaking in, said she wanted to confront him one last time. Not to kill, just to say it. She found him already dead, the door locked, the blood already there. She panicked, left through the terrace, said nothing. Poirot believed her, but her arrival after the murder disproved the clock, because it showed 11:07, and she had seen it too, which meant the killer wanted everyone to think it happened while they were visible to one another. It hadn't. Poirot returned to Imogen, the young widow, the grieving bride. He looked closer. She had lied about her location at the time of death, said she was reading, but her book, found on a table, was untouched. No crease on the spine, no bookmark. The wine glass beside it had no lipstick, no fingerprints. It had been placed, not used. And then Poirot noticed something else. The jewelry box in her room, one of the only untouched pieces of decor. But inside, a key. Not just any key. The library key. The key that should have been on Miles's body. Imogen had taken it, locked the door behind her. Poirot confronted her. She didn't deny it, not entirely. She simply said, I knew he would never leave me anything. He was rewriting the will. Tomorrow. He said I was just a phase, a mistake, so I gave him one too. She hadn't planned the murder. Not at first. But she saw the opportunity, knew the clock, knew the habits, moved the hands, waited until the house was full, and then made her move. It was cold, efficient, final. The motive wasn't passion, it was survival. She was pregnant, and Miles would have left her with nothing. The final reveal hit like a blade through silk, quiet, sudden, devastating. Poirot sat alone that night in the library. The clock had been repaired. It ticked again, softly, innocently. But its lie had almost cost an innocent woman her life, nearly shattered a family, almost fooled the one mind that prided itself on perfection. Time, Poirot realized, is the perfect accomplice, because it cannot lie on its own. But in the hands of a killer, it can become a weapon. Chapter 9. Buried Truths, Living Lies. The shovel struck something solid just before dawn. Not stone, not wood, bone. The gardener dropped his spade with a trembling hand, the color draining from his face as he stumbled backward into the damp morning grass. From beneath the soil of Belgrave Abbey's rose garden, a place known for weddings, charity luncheons, and silent walks in grief, something long dead had surfaced. A human skull, half shattered, its eye sockets filled with dirt and time. Within the hour, the police were summoned. Within 2, Hercule Poirot stood over the open grave, watching silently as the remains were exhumed with delicate, reverent precision. No one was meant to find it. That much was clear. But someone had buried a body here, and they had done it well. Too well. Poirot's eyes narrowed as the bone fragments were lifted, wrapped, catalogued. Nearby, a pocket watch was discovered. Cracked, rusted, but intact. The hands were stopped at 4:36, and engraved on its back, nearly invisible beneath grime, was a name. Thomas Caro. The name meant nothing to the officers, but Poirot's memory, sharp as ever, flared at once. Caro had vanished 5 years earlier. A journalist. Ambitious. Reckless. He'd been investigating an alleged embezzlement scandal involving the Greystow Foundation, an elite philanthropic trust known for its support of orphans, education, and social causes. The case was dismissed as a missing person incident. No foul play, just a man who'd chased the wrong lead and disappeared. But Poirot had always been unconvinced, and now his bones had surfaced beneath the roses. The abbey itself had a history, grand, old, immaculately preserved. It had been purchased decades ago by the Greystow family and converted into the Foundation's headquarters. Half charity, half fortress. Inside its walls were marble staircases, chandeliered halls, and more secrets than saints. Lady Eleanor Greystow, matriarch and public darling, welcomed Poirot with a calm grace that bordered on rehearsed. "A terrible discovery," she said, hands folded in black lace gloves. "But I assure you, Mr. Poirot, the garden has not been disturbed in years, certainly not since before Thomas came to us." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, madame, so you do remember him?" Her smile faltered, just slightly. "Of course, he interviewed us for a piece on our adoption program. Charming boy, but impulsive. He wanted scandal where there was none." That was the first lie. Poirot asked to see the Foundation's employee records. He was shown a visitor log instead. Caro's name appeared twice. Never again. Nothing official, no file, no paycheck. But Poirot found a half-burned note in the fireplace of the estate's old study, wedged beneath the grate like a ghost. "Can't talk here. Meet me in the conservatory. Midnight. Bring what you found." It was unsigned, dated the day before Caro disappeared. Poirot investigated the conservatory, now sealed, unused. Glass cracked from age inside. Beneath an old bench, he found a torn strip of cloth, blood-stained. It had dried, but the color hadn't faded entirely. There was more. A small, rusted nail wedged into the floorboards. Nearby, a button, gold-trimmed. He pocketed it. The Foundation's staff was smaller than expected, a tight circle of loyalists. There was Dr. Felix Brine, the head physician overseeing the Foundation's mental health program. He was clinical, distant, and bristled when asked about Thomas Caro. "I had no contact with him. My work is entirely patient-facing." But Poirot noticed something peculiar in his office, a collection of antique pocket watches displayed behind glass, all wound to the same hour, 4:36. Symbolic, Brine offered too quickly. An artistic metaphor for stillness. Poirot said nothing. Then there was Isadora Hale, the Foundation's PR director, sharp, ambitious, too polished. She insisted the discovery of a body was tragic, yes, but unrelated. "He probably ran afoul of something in London and crawled back here to die. It happens. Drugs, debt, we've all seen it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The final key figure was Rowan Greystow, Eleanor's son. He was different, younger, restless, a veteran with a haunted gaze. He didn't speak much. When Poirot questioned him about Caro, he hesitated. "He wasn't a good man," Rowan finally said. "He stirred things, got into places he shouldn't have." "What places?" Rowan's silence was answer enough. Poirot reviewed every staff, record, every blueprint, every whisper. There had once been a basement level used during the war, converted for storage, sealed 10 years ago. But something felt wrong. Poirot followed the plans himself, descending into the dark beneath the abbey. And there, behind a locked steel door, he found it. A room, sterile, empty, but not unused. There were straps on the walls, a rusted gurney, dried blood on the edge of a sink, and a broken camera. Poirot's breath caught. This was not a medical room, it was a secret. And someone had died here. He confronted Eleanor. She stood, defiant, elegant. "It was for rehabilitation," she said coldly. "The troubled children. Some came broken, some violent. We had to do what was necessary." Poirot pressed further. Caro had discovered the room. He had found records, testimonies, photos, abuse, experiments disguised as treatment. He had intended to publish them. Instead, he disappeared. But not before confronting Eleanor. She hadn't killed him, but she had called someone who would, Felix Brine. The second twist revealed itself in his clinic records, entries altered, names redacted. A patient named Mira was listed as deceased 3 years prior, but Poirot found her alive, locked in a hidden wing of the abbey. Mira, barely 18, told the truth. Caro had interviewed her in secret, promised he would tell the world. She watched him die through a grate in the conservatory. Poisoned tea. Eleanor never drank it. But Caro did, and the clock on the wall, 4:36, the time he collapsed, the time they buried him. Poirot brought everything to the police, the remains, the room, the testimonies. But Eleanor Greystow was already gone. A private jet, a new name, disappeared. Only Rowan remained. He turned himself in, and as he wept, Poirot asked, "Why?" "Because I watched them break those children," Rowan said. "And I said nothing." The headlines exploded. The Greystow Foundation collapsed. But the damage had been done. Buried truths unearthed. Living lies destroyed. And beneath it all, the echoes of one man's determination to speak the truth, silenced by a clock, a poison, and a family with too much to lose. Poirot stood in the rose garden once more. The soil was disturbed, but at last it was honest. Chapter 10. The Final Twist. The verdict came down at precisely 2:43 p.m. The courtroom was silent, tense, heavy, with the kind of quiet that precedes either catharsis or collapse. Outside, the sky was split between rain and sunlight, a contradiction befitting the moment. Poirot sat near the back, unmoving, eyes narrowed as the judge delivered the final words. Guilty on all counts. Imogen Vale, the widow of Gregory Vale, the murdered financier, covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Her shoulders shook. A sob, or something else. The man beside her, Julian Cray, Gregory's business partner, hung his head as if relief had drained the last of his strength. And at the front of the court, the accused, Lawrence Whitlock, once the family's most trusted attorney, stood like a statue as the gavel fell. Justice had been served, or so everyone thought. The case had been a maze. Gregory Vale was found dead in his penthouse 6 months ago, poisoned, his wine glass still warm. His last words, recorded on a security log, "Tell Imogen I forgive her." The public devoured the scandal, a love triangle, a fortune in jeopardy, betrayal from inside the family. And Poirot had unraveled it masterfully, layer by layer, until every piece pointed to Whitlock, the only man with the access, the motive, and the silence of someone hiding too much. It was a clean ending. Too clean. Back at his apartment, Poirot poured himself tea. The steam curled upward like a question. Something wasn't sitting right. Not the verdict, not the evidence, but the ending itself. It had come together too perfectly. Each clue had fit as though designed to be found. The timeline, the footprints, the forged will, all convenient, all obvious. Poirot had learned long ago the truth is rarely obvious. And then the letter arrived. No stamp, no return address, just a single piece of cream-colored stationery tucked under his door. There were only 6 words, written in a hand he recognized, but hadn't seen in years. You missed the real killer, Poirot. He froze. The handwriting was unmistakable. Gregory Vale. But Gregory Vale was dead. Poirot read the letter again. 6 words, 6 knives, every syllable carved into his confidence. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he reviewed everything again, from the beginning. Gregory's final day, the wine, the will, the whispered conversations Imogen never admitted to having, the anonymous tip that first led the police to Whitlock. What if it hadn't been a trail? What if it had been a trap? Poirot returned to the penthouse. The scene had been cleaned, of course, but memories lingered. Ghosts waited in corners. He stood near the bar where the poisoned wine had been poured, and he remembered the wine bottle had been uncorked before Whitlock arrived. A small thing, overlooked, because someone else had been there first. Poirot made one call, then another, and finally, a visit to the medical examiner, a bribe, a favor, a quiet conversation. And the report arrived. Gregory Vale's body had never been fingerprinted. The death was assumed. The identification was visual, done by Imogen herself. A body burned in the fireplace had destroyed any possibility of dental confirmation. Poirot raced to the grave. The tomb was sealed, but he pulled every string. When the coffin was exhumed and opened, it was empty. Not hollow, empty. The body was gone. No bones, no ashes, nothing. He had been played, and the man who played him was still alive. The realization hit like a blow to the chest. Gregory Vale had faked his own death. But why? Why frame Whitlock? Poirot turned back to the company records, to the offshore accounts, and then he saw it. A pattern. Before Gregory's death, hundreds of thousands had been moved from the company's accounts. After his death, the transfers stopped. Until 2 weeks ago. Another transfer. Same amount. Same offshore bank. Same account holder. And the signature? Julian Cray, the man who had stood beside Imogen in court. The man who had wept when the gavel fell. The man who had known Gregory since university. Poirot went to Cray's estate in the countryside. It was quiet, too quiet. A maid let him in, said Julian wasn't there, but Poirot saw the glass on the table, condensation still present. He was home. Poirot searched the study, and there, on the fireplace mantel, was a photograph. New, taken after the trial, and in it, smiling, alive, was Gregory Vale, standing beside Julian Cray. The final twist clicked into place. Gregory had never intended to disappear for good. He'd intended to disappear long enough to destroy everyone who had betrayed him, everyone who had taken from him, and Poirot had helped him do it. He had built the case, walked into the deception, and now a man sat rotting in prison for a murder that never happened. Poirot turned, and there stood Julian Cray, gun in hand, eyes tired. "I told him not to do it," Julian said. "But Gregory, he needed you to believe it. He needed everyone to believe it. You were the only one who could make it real. Where is he now?" Poirot asked, voice low. Julian's hand trembled. Gone. Vanished again. He said once Whitlock was locked away, he'd start over. But I don't know where. Poirot stepped forward. You will tell the police. Julian's lips pressed together. I will, he said. But not tonight. And then he turned the gun on himself. One shot. Silence. Poirot stood there for a long time. The police arrived. Statements were made. But the truth was already gone. Gregory Vale had orchestrated his death like a symphony. And Poirot, his greatest audience, had applauded every note. Justice had been twisted, bent into something unrecognizable. And as Poirot walked out into the grey dawn, he understood something cruel. Sometimes the killer isn't the one holding the knife. Sometimes it's the man pulling the strings from the shadows. The man you never suspect. Because he was already buried, already mourned, already gone, until now.